Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Is it true that humans have liquid metal flowing through their veins, Grandpa Gario? Asked Ura, my youngest grandchild. I raised my feathered head with some difficulty, my neck joints creaking in protest as I turned to look both my grandchildren in the eye. Ura, barely 14 cycles old, perched at the foot of my bed, his dark plumage still downy at the edges. Beside him stood Cora, his oldest sister, 18 cycles and nearly ready for her first molt, the transition into adulthood. Unlike my own ragged appearance, their feathers lay mostly back against their slender frames, displaying the vibrant dark hues characteristic of our bloodline. Their eyes, large and amber-flecked, shimmered with that peculiar combination of curiosity and apprehension that only the young can muster. They watched me warily, as one might observe a strange creature they'd heard stories about but never truly encountered. "Yes," I said, my voice raspier than I remembered it being. "Humans do have liquid metal flowing through their veins, but it's more complicated than that." I shifted against the pillows, wincing as my right wing joint sent a stab of pain down my side. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had survived countless battlefields across dozens of worlds, only to be defeated by my own aging body. More painful than the physical discomfort, however, was the realization of how little these children knew me, their own grandfather. Yet I was practically a stranger to them. Alev and I had lived remarkably long lives in a profession where most die young. Our success had come at a terrible price, my personal life. My own children had grown up with a father who was more legend than presence. And now these grandchildren stood before me as if meeting a distant relative for the first time, rather than a patriarch of their family. The two exchanged an awkward glance, their neck feathers rising slightly in discomfort. They clearly weren't sure how to interact with me, this old warbird who had suddenly summoned them after years of absence. I noticed their discomfort and felt a pang of regret ripple through my chest. "Get a chair," I said, softening my tone. "I'll tell you everything about the humans and the liquid metal in their veins. It's about time you heard the truth from someone who knows it." The room around us was sparse but comfortable, decorated in the traditional style of our species. The curved walls were painted in muted blues and grays that mimicked the sky just before a storm, a preference I'd developed during my years of flight training. Various artifacts from my travels adorned the surfaces, a crystalline formation from the mines of Zel 4, a ceremonial knife gifted to me by the chieftain of the stone tribes on Verus Moon, and a small collection of human trinkets that most of my species would consider worthless, but held profound meaning to me. The lighting was dim, easier on my aging eyes, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The children reluctantly pulled two cushioned perches from against the wall, seats designed specifically for our avian physiology, with depressions for our tail feathers and supports for our wings. They positioned themselves at a respectful distance, not too close, but near enough to hear my increasingly quiet voice. My gaze drifted to the wall opposite the bed, where a single feather hung preserved in a simple frame, bright crimson with gold tips, still vibrant despite the decades that had passed since it had been plucked. It had belonged to Mary, my mate, taken at the height of her beauty during our bonding ceremony. She had passed 15 cycles ago, yet another victim of my prolonged absence. By the time I had retired permanently to our homeworld, it was already too late for us to truly know each other again. "I know I haven't been the best father," I admitted, the words feeling thick in my throat. "And an even worse grandfather. I wouldn't blame you if you walked out that door and left me to die alone. I probably deserve it." The bluntness of my statement seemed to startle them, their eyes widening in unison. Neither child said anything in response. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and missed time. Then, surprising myself, I laughed. A dry, wheezing sound that quickly devolved into a cough. "Well, that's enough self-pity for one day," I said when I could speak again. "Let me tell you about the humans, and how I met the most remarkable one of them all." I settled back, arranging my thinning wings more comfortably against the cushions as my mind drifted back, through the decades. I was young once, if you can believe it, naive too. Back then, I was just a simple fighter for our species during the first and only war we fought as a species. The memories came flooding back, surprisingly vivid despite the passage of time. I was raised on a farm in the southern reaches. My family cultivated skyberries and kept a small flock of tunnel lizards for their eggs. We lived simply, too simply, perhaps. I knew little about technology beyond what was necessary for farming. Our whole species had not yet made first contact with the Galactic Council. They deemed us too primitive, still in our early space exploration phase. We had just begun to establish colonies on our neighboring planets. I paused, lost in recollection for a moment. Everything changed when the Kragar Empire invaded our world. The Council was forced to intervene on our behalf, rushing first contact and sending a group of fighters to help us defend ourselves. Without that intervention, we would have been conquered in less than a cycle. "We learned about the war in school," Cora interjected, her voice hesitant but curious. "They taught us how our ancestors fought bravely and repelled the invaders." I couldn't help but laugh again, this time without the coughing fit. The version they teach in schools is a pleasant exaggeration that heavily favors our species' pride. The truth is far less glorious. If it wasn't for the Council warriors, especially the handful of human fighters among them, we would have lost everything. Our species would be slaves to the Kragar, to this day. "But what about the liquid metal?" Ura asked, his impatience typical of his age. "Is that how the humans defeated the Kragar?" I closed my eyes for a moment, searching through the labyrinth of my memories. The first time I had seen the liquid metal in action was etched into my mind like a burn scar, impossible to forget, no matter how much time had passed. The first time I saw it, I began slowly, was also the first time I met Alev. I was assigned to a bombing squadron. Our commanders, in their limited understanding of alien warfare, thought our natural flight ability gave us an advantage. Our task was to fly over Kragar positions and drop explosive charges, a strategy that rarely worked against an empire that had been fighting space wars for centuries. They had defenses against far more sophisticated aerial attacks than what we could manage with our wings and primitive bombs. I shifted position again, trying to ease the constant ache in my joints. It was during one such failed bombardment that I met him. The Kragar had developed a type of energy weapon. One of these beams caught my left wing, burning away a patch of feathers and sending me spiraling to the ground behind enemy lines. The memory was so vivid, I could almost feel the searing pain again, smell the acrid scent of my own burning feathers. I crashed into a ravine, certain I was going to die. I could hear the Kragar soldiers approaching, their heavy footfalls shaking the ground. When they opened fire again, I covered my head with my wings, a useless instinct against weapons that could vaporize flesh in an instant. I leaned forward slightly, noting how both children had unconsciously edged their perches closer to my bed, caught up in the story despite themselves. But the killing blow never came. When I dared look up, there was a human standing in front of me, directly in the path of the Kragar weapons. I thought we would both die, but then... I paused for dramatic effect, watching their eager expressions. Then I saw it. Black liquid began seeping from slots in his wristbands, flowing over his hands and forearms. In less than a heartbeat, this liquid metal had formed a perfect shield between us and the Kragar. Their energy beam struck it and simply dissipated, like water hitting hot stone, gone in a hiss of steam. Cora and Ura exchanged a look of wonder, completely hooked by my story now. I smiled and fell silent, waiting for the inevitable question. "What happened next?" Ura blurted, unable to contain himself. "Please, Grandpa, tell us more." Their eagerness was gratifying. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I felt truly connected to my family. I closed my eyes again, diving back into the depths of my memories. When the Kragar realized their weapons weren't working, they paused their fire, a fatal mistake. In that brief moment of hesitation, I witnessed something I struggle to describe adequately. The liquid metal surrounding Alev's arms shifted again, flowing like water but moving with intelligence. The shield collapsed inward, reforming around his right arm as a gleaming black blade that extended nearly a meter beyond his fingertips. I gestured with my good wing, mimicking the motion. He moved so fast I could barely track him. One moment he was standing in front of me. The next, he was among the Kragar warriors, that black blade slicing through their armored exoskeletons as if they were made of butter. Seeing their confused expressions, I clarified. "Butter is a human food, soft and easy to cut through. You'll have to forgive me. After living among humans for so long, I sometimes forget not everyone is familiar with their customs." "What exactly is the black metal?" Cora asked, her analytical mind focusing on the key detail. "At school, they treat it as a legend, just a story the older species tell to frighten the younger ones." I wasn't surprised. Our diplomatic relationships with humans had always been limited. Most of our people had never met a human, let alone witnessed nanometal in action. I was probably one of the few of our species who knew the whole truth. "The schools treat it as legend because they don't know any better," I explained. "Our species has very little diplomatic relationship with humanity. Most of what our people know about humans come from third-hand accounts or exaggerated tales." I shifted to a more comfortable position before continuing. "Unlike our species, which was found by the Council when we were still young and technologically primitive, humans had the opposite experience. They evolved in a distant, relatively empty sector of the galaxy. The Council only discovered them after FTL technology broke a certain threshold of speed, allowing exploration vessels to reach their region of space in a reasonable amount of time." My voice took on a tone of reverence that I couldn't quite suppress. When humans were finally discovered, their technology was already centuries ahead of the Council's in many ways. The only reason they hadn't expanded throughout the galaxy was that they truly believed they were alone in the universe. They never had reason to develop the extreme high-speed FTL drives necessary for galactic travel, because they were content with the hundreds of star systems they could already reach in their vicinity. "But the liquid metal!" Ura insisted, his impatience getting the better of him again. "You've said a lot about humans, but still haven't really answered our question." I laughed, realizing I had indeed been rumbling. "You're right, young one. My memory isn't what it used to be, and I find myself getting lost in tangents these days." Taking a deeper breath, I finally addressed their original question directly. "Humans developed many weapons throughout their history, but their fighting styles were so diverse and unique that no single conventional weapon could satisfy them completely. They needed something as adaptable as they were." I gestured to my wrist, where Alev's nanometal cuff had once sat during a particularly memorable mission. "The liquid metal, which they call nanometal, is a solution of microscopic machines suspended in a semi-fluid medium. The humans developed it during one of their many internal wars, before the Council discovered them. It is perhaps the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy, and it's the primary reason humans are both worshipped and feared on every planet they visit. I watched their expressions shift from fascination to shock as the implications sank in. Only the ancient species, those that had achieved spaceflight before humans were even walking upright, have reliable countermeasures against nanometal. Among the younger species, humans are the only ones who can sit at the table with the ancients as equals without being ridiculed or dismissed. The children's faces reflected pure astonishment. I could see them processing this information, reconciling it with the sanitized history they had been taught in school. "But if humans are so powerful," Cora asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "why did one of them take you off-world? Why would they need anyone else?" I smiled, for this was the heart of the story I truly wanted to tell them. Not about nanometal or human technology, but about Alev himself, and the bond we formed that transcended species and changed both our lives forever. "That," I said, "is precisely the right question to ask. And to answer it properly, I need to tell you what happened after Alev saved my life that day." My voice trailed off as a wave of fatigue washed over me. Perhaps it was the effort of speaking for so long, or maybe it was the emotional toll of revisiting memories I had locked away for decades. Whatever the cause, I found myself unable to continue just yet. "Grandpa?" Ura's voice seemed to come from far away. I blinked slowly, focusing on his concerned face. "I need to rest for a moment," I managed to say. "But don't worry, this story is far from over. There's still much to tell about Alev, about humans, and about how one of them changed the course of my life forever." As my eyes drifted closed, I could hear the children whispering to each other, deciding whether to stay or leave. I hoped they would choose to stay, to hear the rest of my story. There was so much more they needed to know, about friendship that crossed the boundaries of species, about sacrifice and loyalty, and about the true nature of humans, who were both more terrifying and more noble than any of our histories acknowledged. But that would have to wait until I regained my strength. For now, I allowed myself to slip deeper into my memories, back to that fateful day when a human with liquid metal flowing through his veins saved my life and set me on a path I could never have imagined. A few minutes passed in silence as I drifted between memories and sleep. The soft rustling of feathers brought me back to the present. "Grandpa? Are you feeling better now?" Ura's voice was tentative, concern evident in his tone. I opened my eyes to find both children still perched on their seats, though they'd drawn closer to my bed. Their presence surprised me. I had half expected them to take the opportunity to leave. "Yes, much better," I said, my voice stronger than before. I adjusted myself against the pillows, knowing exactly what they wanted. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, why Alev took me with him. I cleared my throat and continued. After saving me from the Kragar, Alev brought me to safety, to the Council's medical facility they'd established on the outskirts of our capital. I wasn't the only one he'd rescued that day, or that week. There were dozens of our kind there, all plucked from certain death by the human and his comrades. The memory of that sterile white room filled with injured avians came rushing back. While recovering, I heard that Alev was offering specialized training to a squad in modern warfare techniques. The Council had apparently realized that our tactics were getting us slaughtered. Before my wing had fully healed, I volunteered to join that training group. "You weren't scared?" Cora asked, her head tilting slightly in that way our species does when genuinely puzzled. "After nearly dying?" I let out a soft chuckle. "Terrified is more accurate, but I joined anyway." I flexed my wing unconsciously, feeling the old scar tissue pull tight beneath my thinning feathers. It was the first of many times I would fly toward danger rather than away from it. Something in me had changed after watching Alev face down those Kragar soldiers without hesitation. I paused, remembering those early training days. The flying squad Alev was training rapidly dwindled in size, not from casualties, mind you, but from voluntary departures. Many of my fellow recruits found human combat methods too extreme, too counterintuitive to our instincts. We're natural gliders, built for altitude and distance. Human combat tactics required quick, aggressive maneuvers, rapid changes in direction that strained our wing joints, and challenged everything we'd been taught about proper flight. My chest swelled slightly with pride as I continued. After a few months, I was the only one who remained. The only one who received the full training program Alev had designed. By the end, he could give me a series of whistles and hand signals, and I could execute aerial maneuvers no other member of our species had ever attempted. We formed a connection that transcended our differences. We trusted each other and worked well as a team.
"Is that why he took you to space?"
Ura asked, his eyes wide. Perhaps partially, I admitted. But there was more to it than that. During those months of training, we had become friends, an unusual relationship between species so different. He taught me about human culture while I taught him about ours. We developed a language of our own, part words, part gestures, something uniquely ours. By the time the war ended, we understood each other better than most beings from the same species ever do.
"But why did you stay away for so long?"
Cora's question cut straight to the heart of the matter, her voice carrying a hint of the accusation that must have echoed through my family for generations.
"Why didn't you come back?"
The question lingered, heavy with decades of absence and missed moments. I took a deep breath, knowing I owed them this story, however painful it might be to tell. When the war ended, Alev received new orders from the Council. He was to return to active service as a mercenary, a specialized contractor who takes missions that regular forces can't or won't handle. He asked if I wanted to join him. I gazed out the window at the distant mountains, remembering the moment that changed everything. I was young, barely into adulthood by our standards. The war had shown me how small our world was, how limited my understanding of the galaxy. After seeing what was out there, both the wonders and the dangers, I couldn't imagine returning to a simple farm life. I shifted my gaze back to my grandchildren. So I said yes. I told my family I would return soon, once I had seen a bit more of the galaxy. I genuinely believed that at the time. I never intended to stay away for decades. The first years were the hardest. I continued, feeling the weight of memories pressing down on me. Adapting to space travel, to artificial gravity, to the dizzying variety of species and cultures we encountered, it was overwhelming. Our early missions were simple: escort duties, reconnaissance, occasional security work. Alev was patient with me, teaching me how to use basic human weapons, how to move in various gravitational environments, how to interact with species whose body language and social cues were utterly foreign to me. We struggled financially in those early years. Mercenary work is competitive, and many clients were skeptical of an avian-human partnership. Some outright refused to hire us, claiming I was a liability. Alev never accepted those contracts.
"We're a package deal," he would tell them. "Take us both or find someone else."
I couldn't help but smile at the memory. His loyalty changed everything for me. I worked twice as hard to prove myself worthy of that faith. I learned to use my natural abilities in ways no one had ever considered. Our species' exceptional eyesight and ability to process visual information at high speeds became my greatest asset. The children leaned forward, completely absorbed in the story now. By our 5th year together, we had built a reputation. Alev with his nanometal, and me with my aerial reconnaissance skills. We completed missions others deemed impossible. We specialized in extraction operations, rescuing hostages, retrieving key individuals from dangerous situations. I would scout from above, using various forms of camouflage, unseen and unheard, while Alev executed precisely timed interventions on the ground. I paused to take a sip of water from the cup beside my bed. In our middle years, when we were in our prime, I briefly returned home.
This would have been about 40 cycles ago. Cora's eyes widened.
You came back? Mother never mentioned.
She wouldn't remember. She wasn't even an egg then. The realization of how much I had missed stabbed at me anew. We stayed for less than a month. I introduced Alev to my mate, to my parents. They were polite, but confused by our desire for action. They couldn't understand what I saw in the stars, what drove me to leave again and again. My voice grew quieter. So, we left again, returned to our life among the stars. That's when we truly became legends, though I didn't realize it at the time. I developed techniques for high-altitude stealth observation that are still taught in some military academies today, and Alev, he perfected his use of the nanometal. He could form it into a sniper rifle of unparalleled precision, calibrated to my spotting data. We took on missions that no one else would touch, retrieving stolen artifacts from heavily guarded facilities, extracting political prisoners from maximum security detention centers, gathering intelligence in active war zones. I chuckled suddenly, remembering something. He started calling me Bird Person as a joke around that time. It took me almost a decade to learn it was a reference to some ancient human entertainment program. My revenge was to call him Rick without the intellect, for years afterwards. You should have seen his face the first time I said it. He nearly choked on his drink. It became our private joke, a reminder of the cultural divide we had bridged. Both children looked confused, but I waved a wing dismissively. Human humor. You have to understand their culture to get it. I fell silent for a moment, approaching the hardest part of the story. In our later years, when we were both showing signs of age, Alev made a decision that I couldn't understand at the time. He told me he was retiring, returning to Earth to spend his remaining years with his family. The old anger and betrayal welled up inside me, muted now by time and understanding, but still present. We had the worst fight of our partnership. I accused him of abandoning me, of breaking our team. He tried to convince me to retire as well, to return here and reconnect with my family, but I refused. I was too proud, too stubborn. I told him I didn't need him, that I could continue alone. I shook my head slowly, regretting every word of that final argument. He told me something then that I didn't want to hear. He said, "We fight so others can live in peace. But what's the point if we never find peace ourselves?" I dismissed it as a human sentimentality. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. My voice broke slightly. So that's what I did. For 15 years, I worked alone. I was successful enough, my reputation preceded me, but something vital was missing. It took me 15 years to realize Alev had been right all along. By the time I was ready to apologize, to admit he had been wiser than me, it was too late. I hadn't realized I was crying until I felt the wetness on my feathers. He died peacefully on Earth, surrounded by children and grandchildren who knew him, who loved him. I received the news during a mission at the edge of civilization. I never had the chance to say goodbye, to thank him for everything he had given me. By the time I returned here, following his examples at last, decades had passed. My mate barely recognized me. My daughter was grown, with children of her own. I was a stranger in what should have been my home. A heavy silence fell over the room. The children sat completely still, their eyes fixed on me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Understanding? Judgment? Perhaps all three. "Well," I said, forcing a lighter tone, "that's enough to make anyone depressed. I should have warned you that old soldiers tell the most miserable stories. Perhaps we should discuss something more cheerful. The weather, perhaps? I hear it's been unusually warm this season." My attempt at humor fell flat. Cora and Ura exchanged a glance loaded with meaning.
"We had no idea,"
Cora finally said.
At school, they mentioned legendary mercenaries from our world who fought alongside humans, but they never used names. I never imagined...
That your decrepit old grandfather was one of them? I finished for her. I'm not surprised. Our culture prefers its heroes safely dead and mythologized, not living and flawed. It's easier to build statues for those who can't contradict the polished versions of their lives. Ura's eyes darted nervously around the room.
Is there no risk of your old enemies finding us? Finding you? I mean, if you were as famous as you say...
I shook my head. Very few of my old enemies are still alive, little one, and those who are have better things to do than hunt down a retired mercenary on a backwater world. Besides, I added with a smile, there are still many old friends, and new ones, who would come to our aid if needed. Not everyone I met in my travels wished me harm. Some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy still owe me favors, though I've never called them in. They seemed satisfied with my reassurance, though Ura still looked nervously toward the window as if expecting assassins to burst through at any moment. I suppressed a smile. Young imaginations are always so dramatic. Open the top drawer of that cabinet, I said, gesturing to the small storage unit beside my bed. Cora rose and did as instructed. Inside the drawer lay 5 small pendants, each containing what appeared to be a single drop of black liquid suspended in clear crystal. The liquid shifted slightly as she lifted the drawer, seeming to respond to movement despite its enclosure. Take them, I said. 1 for each of you. 1 for your mother, and 2 spares for the future. Ura picked one up, examining it closely.
Is this...
A gift from Alev, before our paths diverged. If you ever find yourselves in genuine danger, break the crystal. You'll be safe. I offered no further explanation, and to their credit, they didn't press me for one. Some secrets weren't mine to share, not even with family. What mattered was that they would be protected, should the need ever arise. The nanometal inside those pendants was special, programmed with Alev's final protective protocols, a last gift from a human who understood the value of family better than I ever had.
We should go now,
Cora said, carefully placing the pendants in a small pouch at her waist.
Mother will be wondering where we are.
I nodded, suddenly exhausted again. As they rose to leave, I wondered if today had made up for even a tiny fraction of my mistakes, of the years I had lost. Probably not. Some debts can never be fully repaid. But perhaps today was a start, a small step towards redemption, toward healing wounds I had carelessly inflicted through my absence. They were halfway to the door when they stopped and turned back.
We'll convince Mother to come see you,
Ura blurted out.
She should hear these stories too.
Cora nodded in agreement.
We'll return tomorrow, if that's all right. There's so much more we want to know.
A warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with my illness. I would like that very much, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside me. Thank you. After they left, I lay back against my pillows and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the memories of Alev and our adventures brought me more comfort than pain. Perhaps it wasn't too late after all. Not for reconciliation, not for family, not even for an old bird who had spent too long away from his nest. As sleep began to claim me, I imagined Alev watching from whatever afterlife humans believe in, laughing that deep belly laugh of his. "Took you long enough, bird person," he would say. And for once, I wouldn't have a clever retort, because as usual, my old friend would be right. The nanometal pendants would keep my family safe long after I was gone. Alev had understood what mattered most, even when I couldn't see it. Tomorrow, I would tell them more stories. Tomorrow, I would try to bridge the decades of absence. Tomorrow, I would honor Alev's memory by doing what he had tried to teach me so long ago, that no victory among the stars was worth the cost of losing your way home.